last week we finished up at least as far as we were going to go with Jeremiah, and I was asking for options for a new topic, and I got the option of Ecclesiastes, which I really love. So we're going to talk about Ecclesiastes, and we'll see what we come up with. Well, let me start with. I think everyone has an impression about Ecclesiastes, but I'm not sure how much we've actually, read it, looked at it. And that's not a criticism, but we kind of all, I think, have that sense of, okay, here's what it's about. But it might surprise us. Let me say it that way. I think it might surprise us sometimes. So anyway, let's start with if someone asks you, well, what's Ecclesiastes about?
Turn.
Okay, yeah, if you're a music person, yeah, exactly. It turned into a great pop song, yeah. But what other thoughts come to mind when it comes to Ecclesiastes?
I kind of think of making the most of my time on earth, a living and alive. It talks about the fruitfulness of that may have said that wrong, but it talks about the way we actually waste our efforts, anxiety on things that are not important. Didn't say it right.
Nothing new under the sun. Did that come from Ecclesiastes?
Yeah. That phrase shows up a number of times. There's nothing new under the sun, and that tells us that what I want to do. I was thinking of doing it today, but I think I'll do it next week. Is I'm going to read through the whole thing together. Just all, not the fine. There's a little bit of commentary at the end. The preacher also said other things. But I was going to read everything that's said, so that's 12 chapters. And I was thinking, well, I'll do it today, but I'm thinking, no, well, let's start next week, because today I want us to introduce a little bit and know what we're going to listen for, right? So one of those key phrases is under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun, or all your labors is for naught under the sun. So what does under the sun phrase mean?
While you're alive is kind of how I
Yeah.
try to take that.
Yeah, he's an ancient existentialist, right? Existentialism in philosophy is focused on what actually is your lived experience. We use that phrase. We talk about our lived experience. Ecclesiastes is all about what is your actual reality of experience. What's your existence? He's an existentialist. He's not interested in theory or abstractions. He wants to know, when it comes down to it, what do you actually experience day to day, right? Under the sun, right? Now, I wouldn't say that means he thinks there is nothing but that which is under the sun. I think that would be a misreading. Because he talks about under the sun, he thinks that only the things that the sun above shines down on is all that reality is. No. But he is going to come at it from this very much what you experience in life. So that's one of his foci. That's something he's focused on. What else do we think of about Ecclesiastes?
So, does Ecclesiastes, in Judaism, there are two schools of thought about resurrection, and so is he just everything? When you die, you're dead all over. I mean, does Ecclesiastes kind of ignore the idea of a resurrection or afterlife?
He doesn't envision something beyond the grave. And again, I would not make assumptions about all of his thought just because in other words, the same with myself. Don't read into what I think by what I don't say. Listen to what I am saying, not what I'm not saying. So, what does the preacher, Koheleth, in the Hebrews, the word. Is it a name? Is it a title? We're not sure. What does this person actually think? I'm not sure. But because the focus is on what is your experience under the sun, what can you like tangibly, empirically lay your hands on? This is it. And then what seems to happen? We all go to the grave. And does anyone know really anything about that? Not experienced that at all. So if we're talking about what's under the sun, we can't speculate. We can't even talk about what might then happen. So I'm not sure what this guy thinks, but he's certainly not going to talk about, he's not going to say it'll have its worth later in the life to come. No, he's only looking at life under the sun. And what do you do if that's the horizon of reality? Which I think is a great, too much of our articulation of Christianity can be too focused on the hereafter and not seriously deal with life under the sun. And that's when we can kind of sound like, Pollyanna about things, or overlook, tragedies and injustices on this earth. But it'll all be better by and by when we all get to the pie in the sky. No, Ecclesiastes was none of that. It's like, but here's what we're dealing with. This is reality. And how do you make sense of it? So, but that's a great question. He doesn't indicate anything about a life to come, a hereafter. It's just you go to the grave, and in that netherworld of Sheol is where you will be. So this life under the sun now is inaccessible to you. So now what else he might believe, I don't know. Can't ask.
I think also life forces us to focus on the here and now and the things under the sun. So I think even if in principle we were purely focused on the hereafter, we probably in practice aren't. We can't be. You have to. So the teacher's thinking about what is the meaning of all this stuff we care about, how comfortable who recognizes this, what wisdom we amass, and the temporariness of it all is relevant. I think even if you do believe in a literal, very physical heaven that's coming and you're certain of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it doesn't absolve us of the hard, perplexing questions about life as we experience it. What actually happens in this world? Any kind of system of faith or life that ignores the here and now is not that helpful, because the here and now is what we're dealing with. And he's got a lot of wisdom. It's one of those books that falls into the wisdom literature. There's wisdom here about living life under the sun, and he's going to keep saying that. Now, Darrell alluded to that. There's a number of times where he's going to say, in fact, I listened 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Looks like 10 times where he's going to repeat a positive recommendation for life under the sun. Because one of the things we might think about regarding Ecclesiastes is no one's mentioned the phrase yet. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The pronouncements that everything is empty, meaningless, or vain are 15 in number, right? And so we might think, this is just a depressing piece of literature. Everything's meaningless. Let's just cut our wrists and die because it's horrible. But you got to realize, though 15 times he'll say, now that makes this meaningless, but then 10 times he's going to say, but here's how you live. So it's no sort of depressing work that simply, is lamenting the horribleness of everything. It's dealing with the raw reality of our lived experience, like any good existentialist would in philosophy. And yet, no philosopher is worth their salt if all they can do is bemoan our circumstances. Okay, but you're not a philosopher until you give me a philosophy of what do I do then, if that is the case. How do I live? So someone like Soren Kierkegaard would do that. Even Nietzsche would do that. Don't necessarily agree with all of his recommendations. The will to power is perhaps not the best way to live, but at least he says, given the circumstances, I'll tell you, it's the will to power. That's the only thing that matters in the end. Power. And who has it? Okay. But at least you got a philosophy. You know. Okay, so those are other thoughts you have about.
Scanning through it, the part that I remember the most is the contrast that he does, the long list of contrasts. There's a time to be sad, a time to dance, a time to.
Yeah.
He does all these contrasts, and you think, okay, that's the positive and the negative, and how does that all interact? But ultimately, he says life is meaningless without God, and it is kind of, I think about this, I remember reading through this in my business professional life with, I'm working all this hard to, build a better life for me and my immediate family, but what's the ultimate consequence of that? What becomes dust or they respond? And he talks about that kind of, and I remember kind of lamenting that same thing, why am I working so hard?
Yeah. And he might tell us, why are you?
Yeah.
He's going to say, well, why are you? So there's a begging us to have a perspective that we're not fools, believing that we can do what we cannot. I mean, to me, the writer of Ecclesiastes is a harsh critic of foolishness. And for him to give your whole self to a pursuit of something that in the end you leave to someone else, or that, he says that's the height of foolishness. Now he does say, whatever your hands find to do, do with all your might. And you should find pleasure in your labor. So he's going to say some things that are paradoxical. If you're going to read him, you're going to say, but here you said it's totally meaningless, my labor under the sun. But then here he says, take delight and find meaning in it. So to read him is we're going to have to hold in tension these contrasting statements, like there's a time for this and a time for that.
All the time, the time for love and a time, oft quoted, there's a time to love and a time to hate, there's a time for war and a time for peace. That's, the worn out phrases that are used.
Yeah. So
Secularly.
and so the tension is, the wisdom is to know how to respond in the time that we have, and to make the most of it. And that's what Darrell was saying, to make the most of my life, because he's not just a depressive, negative person, but he's a realist, right? He's very much an existentialist.
So this is not nihilism, so.
No,
it's-
no.
But it's kind of in that direction, right?
Well, it could be, especially if we're coming from a perspective that, everything's really rosy. Let me quote some Christian sort of phrases. God has a plan and everything's working out according to his plan. You think the Ecclesiastes writer is going to agree with that? Not as far as you can tell under the sun. Now, if that's true, he can't see evidence of that at all. He's gonna make that very clear. I've seen I've seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking. I've seen the good man getting what the evil desire and the evil man getting what the good desire. I think he would boldly challenge anyone who says, look, I might not understand it now, but there's a silver lining in all of this. I don't think he believes that. I think his point would be, okay, prove it to me. Because he's very much like, you can allege that, but that's all theoretical, because the lived reality is, it just doesn't work out that way. Sometimes the good get...
That first scripture that was on the screen today about, protect us from the folks that are abusing us, you know, it's like, really?
Yeah.
That's-
The call for that, but that doesn't, but we know our lived experiences, and the psalm is written with the reality that why is there the call for that? Because that's not the experience, right? They're saying, help us, Lord, but that help is not always apparent. And you can't say, well, just give it a little time. In 3 weeks it'll be apparent. Now, you may live your whole life and your life end. And there never seemed to be any justice or relief or vindication, right? So he's going to be a realist, but he's not a nihilist, a nihilist. He sounds like it only if we're really wedded to the idea that everything is really coming up roses, right? Which I think is a little bit, naive. It's not taking seriously the pain and suffering of life. And it particularly doesn't sound truthful to people who are experiencing a lot of pain and suffering. That's the thing. It might be easy from my circumstances to say, oh, you know, God's got a plan, it's all working out for the good. But go talk to someone else in some really horrible situation and see how they respond to that idea, right? Those folks are going to say, I don't believe it. You need another message from me. Not that it's all going to work out in the end. I need some hope in the midst of a situation that isn't going to work out. And see, I think that's sort of. But to Alan's point about fearing God, I didn't count up how many times, but there's about at least 5 or 6 times. I mean, it ends that way in chapter 12 at the end. That's not really, it's kind of an addendum. There's the summation, fear God and keep his commandments. But that's not the only time he said, and I feel like that's a third party kind of putting an appendix on, kind of a wrap-up epilogue.
The narrator, that's what he concludes with. Now, what you learn from everything that was written by, the speaker, the most important thing as a person can do is to respect God and obey his commandments.
Right.
Into your thing today. Love your neighbor.
Yeah. But the thing is, that summation isn't like conjured out of thin air. The guy says that.
Yeah.
There's several times where he says, so you need to fear God. And I like the translation respect, because it's not be terrified of. It's you need to realize the place of God in all of this and have a kind of respect and awe for who God is. Part of that's going to be linked to when you realize the frailty of who you are. So the Ecclesiastes writer is very realistic about human frailty, weakness, limitation, ignorance, all that stuff. I mean, are humans capable? Not in his eyes. You can try your hardest. It still may not work out, right? So we are assailed by powers in this world and circumstances greater than ourselves. And that's the real human condition. So he's a realist about we're frail, we're weak, we're ignorant. But again, the question is, so how do you live? How do you live if that's your circumstance? Were you going to ask something, Jim?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I have
Yeah.
a professor that one of his slogans was, it's attitude, not aptitude, that determines whether you'll be bitter or better. And I've tried to latch onto that, and Derek and the rest of my family can tell you that I don't do that as well as I would like to.
None of us do.
But
How kind of the son.
my attitude has, and I've spent a lot of bitter time in Ecclesiastes in my life, but I have determined that Kaholic was an optimist, but his optimism was camouflaged by the absurdity of life. And once you sort through what happens in life, you can say, okay, I can deal with that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Ecclesiastes, I think the last time I taught it was when I first returned from Africa. It was the first thing I taught. the church where I was, and they gave me a Sunday morning class. It was a big class, big room.
Why did you do that during the transition in life?
Because I thought it was a brilliant piece of work. And because I wasn't maybe I wasn't very aware of the needs of my audience. I don't know that they were highly impressed to
So
be.
they didn't tell you to do it, you picked it?
Yeah, I picked it. but here, I remember here's how I positioned it. I said, when I read it, I feel like this is someone who knows a lot more than they're saying, this is like a professor giving students an exercise, but wink, wink, he knows more than he's saying. But this is an exercise to get them to come to the end of themselves, right? And then once they go through the exercise and go, holy cow, life is meaningless, I can't make sense of anything, then he's going to come in and go, all right. Because there's more than this book says, right? But it's a necessary exercise, because unless I come to that humble position of I'm unable, I'm incapable. I mean, in AA, this is step one. We found that we were powerless to handle our addiction. And step two, so we made the decision to entrust our lives to a greater power. In step three, we actually do that. This is kind of that kind of practice. It's the exercise of and that's why it hit me that way. It's like these young students think they're smart, and they are smart. That's why they're in the class, and they got answers. And so the professor's there just inundating them with questions they can't answer, situations that befuddle them, getting them to kind of run out of steam and go, oh. Because there'll be wisdom when they finally say, okay, maybe we don't have all the answers. Maybe life isn't a formula. Maybe it's not like Job thought. I mean, think how similar this is to the book of Job. Book of Job is undermining the idea that good people get good and evil people get evil. Isn't that what Ecclesiastes is saying? Why does the wisdom literature seem to be holding on to the same theme? Right? Job and Ecclesiastes got the same exact point in two different forms. One in this I see it as kind of a parable about a man named Job who has everything imaginable go wrong to him in 24 hours, and then this long dialogue or trilogue. No, I guess it's really four. 3 friends, him, and then Elihu shows up later. Finally, God ends up 5 people in a conversation. But it's the same point. Is life formulaic? Is everything cut and dry? Does everything make sense? Job thought so until his life fell apart, and his friends still thought so after his life fell apart. It all makes sense, Job. Yeah, you somehow sinned and brought this upon yourself. Just repent and tell God you're sorry, and then maybe he'll have mercy on you, right? It's the same thing. So I see it as the teacher taking us through this exercise of realizing nothing's formulaic, nothing works according to some obvious plan. You're not very capable, so now what you gonna do?
Always the illusion.
Yeah. Alan?
So was this about 1,000 years before Christ? I'm reading, or maybe 500 years. Another testament to free will. And when I first started the Christian walk, in our kind of formulaic background, I certainly didn't think that way. My bad behavior is why I'm getting these bad things to happen. And I loved it when I finally, and you talked about it not too long ago, where Christ said, okay, remember that tower that fell on a bunch of people and killed a bunch of people, and that's God saying, there's free will, there's.
But that wasn't even free will. That's just wrong place, wrong time.
I mean, in other words, God didn't throw those stones. I mean, Jesus
Right.
is making the point, John.
Yeah.
God did not throw those stones down to kill all
Right.
the bad people because of what
That's not punishment.
or, what sins brought about the, epilepsy or the skin conditions for, people that were begging for mercy from.
Right.
So would you, so in the form of a question, would you say that this is this first thought kind of prompted God is not about beating you up, and he's about mercy, not punishment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and like I'm saying, next week I want to just read through all of it, so we just hear it in one sitting, and just let it all flow, and not rapidly, not studying, picking it apart, just hear it all. Where does God fit in all of this? He shows up only rarely in Ecclesiastes. Now, that doesn't mean he's not in the thought of the preacher. But the preacher's talking about life under the sun, the way things actually happen, and God's not a big agent in all of that. I mean, there's the occasional thing, well, you ought to fear God. That's better than not fearing God. But it's talking about this is what happens. It's messy. It's not all just and worked out and perfect. But that's what we're having to deal with. That is the life that we have to face. It's difficult. And so God is not a major subject. Now, again, we don't infer, therefore, he's not a believer. No. That would be to say you listen to one lecture by a professor and thereby derive everything that professor thinks. No, because, again, I think this is an exercise in us realizing, this is not as simple as I thought. Or, if I had a formula, he just blew my formula out of the water. Or if I thought, well, God's going to take care of me and and then if I do wrong, he's going to punish me. Maybe it's not that simple. So how do I live then if everything's not that clear? Were you going to say something?
Well, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Where did the thought ever come from that it should be any other way? If what we experience by looking and observing around us leads us to what the Ecclesiastes writer says it is, we should have no other choice but to think that way, and then we wouldn't have this problem because we would know that's the way it is, and this would not even be a question. It would be something accepted as fact, but it isn't.
Right.
Something puts it there at the beginning, be it cultural, be it natural law, be it whatever.
Yeah.
Something puts it there at the beginning, and that's where the mistake is.
Right.
You
Okay.
think it's the illusion of control?
Yeah. Well, I think, if I'm going to hazard a guess, just my thought. The first thing I'm thinking about when you're saying that, I think it is from the time humans became conscious. It's like this is not a Christian problem. This isn't even a Jewish problem. This is a human problem. It predates it. I think that human beings, from whatever point Homo sapiens became conscious of themselves, there was always this idea that there is this higher realm of gods and spirits who are really governing everything. Now, the view is often not nearly as humanistic as we tend to be. Ancient peoples didn't think they had much power. Everything was ruled by the gods. And maybe the gods were capricious. Maybe they weren't very fair. But there was the idea that what's happening is happening on another level. And we're having to deal with whatever happens. So I think there's been this sense that, well, maybe there's some logic to it up there that's attributed to the gods. Maybe they've got their logic. I guess when you move from a purely capricious, arbitrary set of gods to a God of order, like the Jews did, a God who designs an order and brings order out of chaos, then you're going to be prone to think somehow all of this is supposed to be reflecting that order. And Ecclesiastes is saying, it doesn't look very orderly to me. He's just being bold and saying, you could postulate that, but that doesn't seem to be the reality. So I would say that's part of it, is there's this human tendency. Other thing I would say, and this is kind of to C.S. Lewis's move from atheism to Christianity, was he asked himself the question, where did my sense of justice come from? And I think that is a ubiquitous human trait. None of us have ever seen perfect justice, and yet all of us long for it. Like all of us, anyone, every culture goes, that's not fair. Where did you get your, and I don't mean to be disparaging about the definition of fairness, but the idea is, wait, something's wrong here. Why does everyone in every culture throughout time have a sense that things ought to be different? Like there's a gap between the way things are transpiring and the way things ought to be. Where do we get that sense of ought? C.S. Lewis concluded that sense of ought comes from beyond myself, because I've never experienced it in life, and yet I can't rid myself of it. I can't just say, oh, this kind of arbitrariness and injustice is all good. There's something that pushes back and goes, no, it's not right. Children shouldn't get cancer. It just shouldn't happen. A young life should not end so suddenly. And all of us think something's wrong. Where did we get the idea that it's wrong? Well, it could be that phrase that God has set eternity in their hearts, which I think is chapter 3. Okay, so those two things, and then I'm going to take Edwin. So two things. One is, I think our conception has always been somebody's running a show here, aren't they? So there's got to be some order. And the other one is there's this innate sense that something ought to be different. So I don't think Ecclesiastes is asking us to get to a place where we're comfortable with the absurd and the unjust and that things aren't as they should be. He's acknowledging things are not as they should be. He's not saying, oh no, this is how things should be, and you should just simply accept it. No, he's saying this is how things are. You've got to accept, again, you've got to accept life on life's terms is one of their phrases. You can't buck against the reality. But should I say, therefore, because this is reality, this is right and good? No, something in me tells me this is not right and good. There is a better possible world. Even if I've never seen it, I can sense that there is, right? And I would say that's, to me, I would agree with Lewis, that sense is a kind of innate connection to the divine. We know something of God, even if we've never heard of God, and we feel it in ourselves. It's like, but that's just not right. It shouldn't be that way. Some people have that sense stronger than others, but still, I don't know anybody in their right mind who's not got psychological, pathologies or something, who's going to entertain, the evil and the cruel as appropriate. Okay, Edwina?
Well, this is not comforting to me, I'll tell you. What is comforting to me and what he didn't ever bring out is what is in Romans, about nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Yes.
And he lists everything that can possibly happen in those 2 or 3 verses in Romans. And then, because my biggest fear is that it's all going to be up to me. And I know that I can't do it.
Right.
And I know actually there's no human that can do it and has all the wisdom. And that's what we're up against.
Right.
And that is a very depressing thought.
Yeah.
The fact that nothing can separate us from the love of God, that says to me, I'm not all by myself in this.
Exactly.
I may not see how it all's going to work out in my lifetime, but I'm not all by myself, and none of us are all by ourselves.
Right. And I think again, I think this is more of an exercise to realize you can't do it yourself. If it's he's getting us to that point because that's what I think when all the students in his class, if it were a class, finally go, okay, we're all ready to just commit suicide. You've convinced us. Then he would say, like you're saying, okay. And he would start to weave a story of hope. What do? But this is all on the front end of if you were foolish enough to think you could do it yourself or you could fix it yourself, enough wisdom, enough money, enough whatever. And he's going to go through, I tried it all and I couldn't fix anything. So is he want us to end in despair? No, he wants us to know the futility of our attempts. But where does that ultimately put us? We entrust ourselves to the care of God. But he doesn't allege that God then, therefore, is making everything work out formulaically and obviously all the time. That's just not the nature of life. Yeah. Derek, were you?
Well, I was thinking, this has different layers, right? So
Yeah.
we talked about the cultural, provenance of this sense and the human sort of spiritual sense. But there's also the, as a 41-year-old in the throes of midlife, reevaluation, I think it's a natural part of you look at what you've done and thought, wow, that wasn't as important as I thought it was at the time, but it was, I think that experience, there's just a rhythm to life, and that's a normal thing. It's sort of, you talked about deconstruction a couple of years ago. I think it goes on that level too. So I think there's something inevitable, just like, crawling before you walk, that there's a phase where you realize, and I'm thinking about this a lot because that's the age I'm at, and I'm noticing all of my peers are doing it too. I have a tradition with my resident friends who, we went through sort of more together for a few years, learning to practice medicine. And there's about 30 of us every year. At the beginning of the academic year, we send out an email updating each other. And we decided postgraduate year 15, which is where we are now, must be the point where you realize, oh, okay, I've done some things. It's really cool, but none of it matters. It's just really interesting to see that theme. I think with maybe one exception in my cohort, everybody had that kind of interwoven into their update, a recognition that it's time to reassess things and to to rid ourselves of the delusion that what we do is the be all and end all anyway, and or that, like Dennis said, that we can do it at all.
This
Right.
applies to engineers too, by the way.
I'm sure, yeah, but I think it's just a human thing. I don't
Yeah.
think it's,
It-
it's just
Fathers
like,
with
I
kids.
bring that out just because we were all at the same
Yeah.
point in life.
It's Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward,
Yes.
right? There's that point where you realize that the fall is actually a movement upward. As ironic and paradoxical and contradictory as that sounds, you have to learn to fall upward.
Yep.
And so he talks about the same thing, but I don't think you can't know it on the front end, and he wouldn't try and disabuse young people of their dreams and visions. He says, when you're young, you build a box, but at a certain age, you start to decide, what should I put in it? Like, I've built a box, a career, a family, I bought a house, I've got a mortgage, I constructed a life. Great. But now, what do I put in this thing? What actually is of value? Now, there are people in this world who have never built a life, and you can only be merciful and compassionate. You can't ask them, like Jesus did, to die to themselves. They have no self to die to. So the progression is, we do build a self first. And then Jesus turns around and says, guess what? I want you to die to that self. I've spent so long building this self. I thought this is who I am, right? And he turns around and says, okay, now it's time to die. I'm not saying it was a bad exercise, but the point of the exercise is now to put that self away. But it's the self that got degrees and won awards and was a great athlete or whatever you built yourself around. I thought this was great. And now I'm being asked to die to that? Yeah, because the next stage is letting go. See, that's what I think the Ecclesiastes writer is going to do. And when we read it, we're going to hear it, because there's a part where he starts giving advice to young people. Because he's older, and he's gone through this evaluation. And he's saying, so I'm telling you, when you're young, pay more attention to God, maybe than I did. Because you're going to have to come around to figure out, well, what am I going to do anyway? See, so that's why this is wisdom literature. This is, it traces the pattern, but it's not the whole story. It's the getting to the point where you're asking the question, well, what now? Because I'm not sure that anything is lasting that I've invested so much time in. Now what do I do? It's taking someone to that point and asking them the question, what do I do now? And if, like I think this writer's trying to do is getting younger people to do that earlier. That helps. It's better if they can face some of their limitations while they're still full of vim and vigor and start to get a perspective. So in Kisakuma, the tribal language, they called the young people the Basumba, which means the creators. Well named. They're the energetic ones. They're going to make something. Yeah, but the Banamhala, the old people, they're all sit back going, yeah, go ahead, kid. They all know what the Basumba are going to try and do with all their vision and excitement. The Banamhala, they see a different picture, right? I really don't know. I never got a good definition, but I know it's not Basumba. I knew what Basumba meant, the creators, and the Banamhala were the old ones.
I like what you said, though, about that, this is this wisdom of this speech, and then at the end, the narrator's saying, he's got this perspective. We don't have second
Ecclesiastes, right.
Ecclesiastes to know what's the rest of Paul Harvey, what's the rest of the story that he would have said, but it's obvious that he.
We don't want to read, we don't want to read it like this is all this guy thought. What a depressive person he must have been. No, I think if read in that sense, it's part one that you have to sometimes wrestle with Ecclesiastes or you'll never gain wisdom.
You're not honest.
Yeah, you've got to wrestle with these facts. But then there's something else that comes. His intention was not to lay all that out for us, right? So we'll see.
The part that where I was just going to say that's kind of the second, version of this is when, with the pet phrase "life under the sun," which again you have this compilation. Daryl, you talked about the Old Testament. So sun, S-U-N, S-O-N. What's that allegorical tie? But also, God is light, and I think that was even viewed in Old Testament times. And so all of this is happening under God's providence, His light, His exposure, and He's giving us a piece of our narcissism, our self-delusion, and then saying, how do you treat that?
Well, I really like what Edwina did, because what comes after the conclusion? Well, like she said, you could go to Romans and Paul saying, what can separate us from the love of God? I mean, when you face your limitations and the absurdities of life, and that everything doesn't work out in this life, and you don't always see justice, but then what do you hold on to? And she's exactly right. We could go to teachings of Jesus or something, because Ecclesiastes is not the final word, but it's an important word. So what we're going to do next week is I have to get started early because I timed it. I read it. It takes me about 25 minutes, and I'm trying to read very quickly. But I want us to read all of it, except for that last commentary bit. I don't want to read that. I just want to read what the preacher said, Coalesce said. And then hear, but I think maybe it's helpful because now we know what to listen for. We're going to hear, when you hear, but here's what you ought to do. Or when you hear, but fear God. Or when you hear, under the sun. We'll have these phrases in mind that maybe when we hear it all in just one quick fell swoop, maybe we'll go, okay, it's not all just depressive. It's nuanced. And I kind of see what there's going on. So that's what we're going to do next week. Hope you can stay for the meal.